Welcome to Tales from the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Mick West. My guest today lives in Spain, and she met somebody on the internet a few months ago, and he turned out to be a conspiracy theorist, and we're going to talk about that. So welcome, and thank you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, so I've listened to some of your episodes, so I think the first thing I want to say is the duration of mine is, it's very short, doesn't hit the highs of some of the stories I've heard.
Right, but it's very interesting because I think the experience you had is probably something that a lot of people would have had, and it's kind of a perplexing experience. I think, like, you met somebody, and initially, what was your impression of this person?
Beautiful, incredibly handsome, incredibly straightforward and honest. Had an interest in philosophy, just seemed to care about the world to an extent and have an idea for his future. Like, he was getting everything together.
Right.
Really nice to be around.
Yeah. So I guess you thought you'd found someone good from
Absolutely.
that. Yeah. Right. I guess you went out with him a few times, and then what would be like the kind of the first inkling you had that something wasn't quite right?
First inkling, I don't know. It was the corona. He didn't take coronavirus as seriously as most people do. I think most people, they don't necessarily believe it, but they pay lip service to what they need to do and say. He wore the mask and he did everything he should, but, quietly complained about it.
So would he say something about he thought that it was a hoax, something like that?
He didn't think it was dangerous. He thought it was blown out of the water. But so I've just moved to Spain. So this is a completely new experience for me. So, I've been meeting new people, and I have been encountering a lot of conspiracy theories, mild ones, coronavirus related. So stuff about China invented it. I think people talking about a nefarious government taking advantage of coronavirus. So all these stories are kind of being proliferated everywhere by people I know. So when he started saying those things, I was like, okay, there's a general distrust of government here, but that is everywhere at the moment.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting the differences in various countries with conspiracy theories. Like, obviously I'm based in the US. I'm from the UK, but I've been in the US for a long time. So you get this perspective of what a conspiracy theory is, and for a lot of people, it's very much based around what the conspiracy theory is in their country. So it's interesting to hear about other countries. But the stuff that you mentioned in your email, I think it very much reflects a lot of the things that we have in the US. And the big difference, I think, between the US and Europe in terms of conspiracy theories is that the European conspiracy theories seem a lot more concerned with the idea of this kind of great replacement type thing, with people coming in and taking over the white culture, essentially.
Oh, well, yeah. So this was completely new to me. So our honeymoon period was like a really amazing month of trying to spend as much time with each other as possible, talking on the phone all the time, just kind of falling madly for each other. But slowly these kind of theories came through, and the really shocking one was this idea of Spain being taken over. It was a fear of the EU. I felt it had parallels with kind of the US conspiracy theories as a real preoccupation with kind of individual rights, freedom, right to bear arms. There we go. There's the first one. Right to bear arms. On our first date, he said, I believe in gun ownership. And as a British person, that's a big thing to say.
Yeah. So what are the gun laws like in Spain then?
He's told me Spanish police officers can have a gun with them at all times, but it's difficult to prove that you needed to use it. So police officers have it as a deterrent, but rarely use it.
Do individual people have guns in Spain? Do they?
I think it's only related to hunting licenses.
Okay, yeah.
You can own a gun, but it's there's a lot of rules and regulations around it, and it's not common.
his idea of like, gun ownership being, a fundamental right or whatever, that he thinks that you should be able to own guns. Do you think that comes from some kind of Spanish cultural thing, or is it kind of coming from the American conspiracy theory type thing? Because obviously in America, there's this whole Second Amendment thing where gun ownership is so fundamental to so many Americans, and the idea that it's going to be taken away is underpins a lot of conspiracy theories. So is it the American culture infecting the Spanish conspiracy culture, or is it something more uniquely Spanish?
I don't think I know enough about it to confidently say which one I think, but from what I know of European culture, technically being European, there's just no interest in gun ownership.
Yeah.
Even when I've met people who are considered right-wing working in governments, and I've been their teacher, when it came to how to act socially and LGBT rights and all that, very liberal, I would say, more left-wing than the UK.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a shock to me. I would never expect that.
So he's talked to you about the coronavirus and gun rights. When did the racism creep in? When will you become aware of that?
As soon as I met him, and I just ignored it. And I'm really shocked with my behavior, because as soon as I think it was like our second or third date, and he was just kind of showing me around the town. And he actively went to the place where the Jews used to live in the town. And said, this is where we expelled the Jews in like the 14th century. And,
wow.
For me, I was like, well, that's just a historical fact. It's a historical fact that most people wouldn't be interested in, but I would be interested in, and clearly he's interested in that. And then he spoke a lot about how there's a lot of Romanian gypsies in lots of towns in Spain, and he spoke badly, like pretty badly of them, which was definitely a red flag.
Mm-hmm. And this obviously, like, he has this somewhat racist undercurrent, but how did that kind of manifest itself in terms of a conspiracy theory type thing? It's one thing to say like it was a good thing to get rid of the Jews back in the 14th century, and that he doesn't like gypsies. Then he's going to start at some point telling you about like some kind of plot that's going on. How did you discover that he had these ideas?
I don't know how he lets people know about his belief system early on. I don't know how much he keeps to himself. He really did want to share with me. He didn't want to convince me of anything, but he would say inflammatory statements. And at first I would laugh, thinking it was some kind of shared joke. But then the inflammatory statements kind of continued. And then just one day he just said, "I don't like Jews." And I thought it was a joke. And I was like, why on earth don't you like Jews? I just haven't met any here. And he didn't go into the full reasons. And we were together, and he made it into an explanation about kind of Catholics historically hating Jews, being brought up a Catholic, in a Catholic society. So I just convinced myself, I think, that it was something he hadn't thought about much.
Mm-hmm. Like a cultural thing.
A cultural thing, something that had been passed down on him. I was aware from the beginning that he hadn't traveled much, and he hadn't really been outside of Spain. That, not that it has too much of a bearing, but if you stay in the same area with can have a bearing. And I was aware that he had a difficult time in his childhood, that he spent a lot of time on the internet from a young age, and he started smoking weed from a really young age as well.
That's interesting. So what did he, was he using weed when you were with him?
Yes.
It's interesting because I was just talking to a woman a few days ago, and I just published her podcast. Her name was Sarah, and she mentioned that her partner was smoking a lot, cannabis. She felt like that this actually had an effect on his beliefs, his conspiratorial beliefs. Uh, did you ever suspect anything like that? That the drug use contributed in some way to the beliefs or the growth of these beliefs?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I'm all for the legalization of
Yeah,
weed, but it's still a drug and it still affects your brain and your ability to process information. Yeah, and if you're smoking it every day for many, many years, that is going to have an effect. It's going to have an effect on how you see yourself. It's going to have an effect on your motivation to do different things, to try different things. Because when you smoke, when people smoke, they become passive, and
yeah.
just easily just take in lots of information, watch TV for hours and hours and hours, and I know YouTube have changed. I know they've changed their algorithm, but for a good few years, their algorithm was take you to the next video that's the most similar to this video. So then people they would really get stuck in, their own echo chamber. And if you're
Yeah.
watching really extreme content, that's going to continue. I also know that he was an avid 4chan user for many years.
Oh, really? Hmm. Yeah. Now, would that be in English language 4chan?
Yeah, his speaking comprehension and listening skills in English are excellent.
Right. Yeah. So he probably got quite a lot of stuff from 4chan because that's obviously a big melting pot of various conspiracy theories and racism and sexism and things like that. You mentioned, like, I was just looking over your email. You mentioned that you were interested in incel culture. That kind of ties in a little bit with 4chan to a degree. But how did you get interested in incel culture? Can you briefly describe what incel culture actually is?
From my personal experience, I lived in a lovely little liberal bubble, a lovely little kind of art school London bubble, people around my age with my very left-wing beliefs, progressive, typical city point of view. And when I got to Vietnam, when people move really far away, there's a lot of lost souls and there's a lot of bitterness. And I just met a lot of men who really didn't like women very much.
Wow.
And I'm spending years around, years kind of studying feminism as an undergraduate, talking about all these theories and ideas. It was amazing for me, being convinced that the whole world felt the same as me. And then kind of turning up to a new place and being like, wow, no, there's a lot of very upset Western men coming to another country to kind of live some kind of fantasy of the perfect household. The man of the house, and then a younger, beautiful woman who listens to you and cooks all your food, and then you have children. And there can be a lot of animosity towards Western women by Western men in places like Vietnam.
It's fascinating. I never really heard of it put like that before. But yeah, you can kind of see that because you do have a more traditional family structure, I guess, in Vietnam. With is it more of a paternal figure ruling the household type thing in Vietnam, or at least being the head of the household?
The women there are strong
Right,
and capable, but there is,
more machismo.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Vietnamese culture can be very masculine. We all there are jokes about Western men going over to Asia to find a docile woman, and it's funny because they don't really find a docile woman, but they do find a woman who has been taught what her role is in a romantic relationship, and it's quite different to what Western women expect.
Yeah. So like with incels, it's this kind of I guess a movement in I've only really seen it in the States, but I guess it's going to be all around the world because it's this kind of men being disaffected with their position because they feel like they're being rejected by women, and they kind of fall into this more this idea that Western culture is being changed and traditional gender roles are being changed, and they don't like it and they want to change it back. And I think that is to a degree kind of underpinning a variety of these right-wing conspiracy theories, not like as a core that's what everything's based on, but it's like one aspect of it. They think that the culture is changing, so they're fighting.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a fear of this kind of a breaking down of what they expected in their future.
Is this something that your Spanish friend that you met, is it something that he subscribed to, like not incels so much, but kind of men's rights or?
No, and that's something that I in Vietnam learned to pick up on, and also try and understand the shades of it, because in my office, when you become long term in a place like Vietnam, the women leave, the Western women leave, so
right.
Because there's not many opportunities for them to settle down, to build a life there. Not all, but a lot of Western men stay and they build lives there. But what comes with this is an accepted atmosphere of these ideas. And for me, coming into offices and building relationships with these kind of guys, who they were all on that level of Joe Rogan loving, Jordan Peterson reading, white middle-aged men, and me coming in this at the time 29-year-old a feminist from London.
Yeah, how did they react to you then? I mean, was it? Do you think it was a bit difficult for them?
Yeah, some of them absolutely hated me, but a lot of them didn't. And I had a boyfriend for a while, and he was these theories were really important to him, and he felt like he'd been left behind, and he was fearful of the binary between male and female collapsing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely. And he felt like he had been left behind, and Jordan Peterson really spoke to him personally.
Yeah. Jordan Peterson's an interesting character. Yeah, do you feel like you're a young liberal feminist, and do you feel like there is definitely a change in the culture that's been going on for decades, basically, and do you feel like it's kind of like forcing things out into the open that were always there, or is it kind of creating something new in terms of these disaffected young men?
When you are the placeholder of just by your gender and the color of your skin, of the most amount of rights, the most amount of respect, the most ability and access to education, social mobility, but nobody tells you that you are. Nobody has ever told you that you're that. And then suddenly, not suddenly, it's been a really slow process. Yeah. But more and more people are saying, hey, look at that privilege. Why don't I have that? First you had white feminists, then you get and of course Black rights movement, and then this starts coming into how, rather than it just being based on the culture of actual physical rights, you start talking about what are the problems impeding my life and how I'm being treated day to day. And I do think if you go in and attack and say, look at what you've got, look at your privilege, the first thing a lot of white men who are struggling for many reasons are going to do is get aggressive and become like a victim. I'm making sense. And and this is what I saw. And you can't negate people's own personal experiences, because even though you, as a white middle class male, have a lot of opportunities and a lot of respect in society other people don't, you still have your own problems and troubles. And there's a whole side of, there's like a whole masculinity studies, isn't there, where they talk where these issues are discussed, and expectations of men in society and how they struggle.
Yeah, I think obviously I'm a middle-class white male, and I don't know if I really had this expectation when I was growing up that I was going to be privileged, but I never really saw any major obstacles in my future when I was young. It just seemed like, I'm going to go to university, I'm going to get a job, I'm going to have buy a house, probably get married. I wasn't really into getting married back then, but it just seemed like it was all going to happen. And I think people don't realize that they're privileged, obviously. And then when they're told that they're privileged, and then they feel that their lives aren't going the way that they would assume or they like, then they get angry about being labeled as being privileged, and they see the issue as being elsewhere.
Absolutely. And I do think there's an element of scapegoating involved in this. It's so easy to get angry at a group who's telling you you're wrong, rather than, I mean, it's not like I'm expecting people to do that, but I do think there are some systemic economic problems that have been happening for a long time, which means that the expectation that I was given as a working class, relatively poor working class person, was that I would go to university, it would be free, I would go get a career, and I wouldn't be in that situation anymore because of education. But I don't think that is realistic anymore. And I expected to own a house, I expected to have a car, I expected
right.
to have, children, all these things, and none of those things are available. Maybe one day I'll get a car, but none of these things are available to me, and they're a struggle to get.
Yeah, and I'm kind of a generation ahead of you. Like, I'm in my 50s now, and when I grew up, university was very much kind of expected and free for anybody who went through the school system. You went to university. I got a grant to go to university. It didn't cost me anything, and it's remarkable, kind of looking back on it, just how almost how easy life was back then, that you would just go to university and get a job. Of course, you had to be able to do the work at university, but it was almost like my hands were being held through this whole process. And I think perhaps with things moving away from that model now over the last few decades, and it's certainly really never been like that in the United States. You don't really get this free university. Everybody ends up with massive debts.
I don't know much about the United States, but I think there's something about the United States, that I've read about, and it's this kind of denial of the class system. In the UK, we're open about it. People are like, yo, I'm working class. Yo, I'm middle class. We're very, we talk about that openly. It's on our TV screens. We see how people live in different ways. But in America, there seems to be this, you just don't see poor people on TV.
Yeah, there certainly are. Obviously, there's poor people, but there's kind of there's some poor culture, I guess you would put it, with kind of like the redneck, for want of a better word, culture. They will label themselves as being proud rednecks, people who live in poor, generally white cultures in the United States. But there's certainly a sense in the United States that I think someone said that everybody in the United States is a millionaire who has been temporarily inconvenienced, and that everybody feels like we shouldn't tax the rich because one day I might be rich, and they think that this idea of money is very much open to everybody when it obviously isn't. There's a huge proportion of the people in this country who are never going to get rich, and it's impossible that everybody will be. And it is kind of strange. They talk a lot about the middle class in the United States, which I always found very interesting, because they never talk about the working class. And they kind of fold them in together, but there is in the United States, there's middle class people, people with jobs and houses, and then there's this huge mass of people, the working class and the unemployed, who just don't even get a say really in the culture, I think. And I think there may be something coming from that. If the middle class is being increasingly excluded to you, then you're going to get this type of resentment. And perhaps you don't get it so much in the UK because people say, oh, I'm working class, then it's okay for me to live on a council estate and draw the dole. I'm not sure exactly what they do nowadays. That was what I would describe it back in the 30 years ago. But yeah, it's so with your friend in Spain, you think you described him as being middle class?
From what I can can tell his family always worked. He never talked about being in poverty. I do think there was neglect from parents, maybe some form of abuse. There's definitely neglect, though. There was definitely a lot of anger towards family members.
You said he didn't do so well in school. There was problems with school.
Yeah. He told me that he believed himself to be autistic really early on.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I was like, okay, I don't know what to do with this information, to be honest. I've got a family member who's autistic, but it made me, because I really liked him, and it made me want to understand it more. So I researched a lot. What's it like to be in ridiculous? What's it like to be in a relationship with an autistic person? And what to expect, and what are some difficulties, and all those things that I read. Maybe I was trying to find it, but all those things I was reading for a little bit of support and understanding were quite easily identifiable in him. So I was like, oh yeah, I think he's got it right. I do think he is neurodiverse in some ways. And I got the impression that he was really ignored at school and treated like a problem rather than trying to be understood. And his family never accepted that he was in any way different, which probably would have caused a lot of problems.
Yeah, definitely. So when you say he was ignored at school, what does that mean? Ignored by his classmates or ignored by the teachers?
That he wasn't considered academically bright, so he was just left to it. I know that he just played a lot of video games, spent a lot of time online from a young age.
Kind of sounds like me, except we didn't have online when I was young. I was kind of left to my own devices as a child. I ended up programming computer games rather than playing them.
I mean, my brother spent most of their childhood on playing video games and playing computer games with friends and just being part of that culture and part of that world with no problems.
Yeah, no, I guess like what we're talking about here is like what are the factors in people's past that can kind of lead them to come to this place where they start distrusting things. And you obviously, if you've looked into incel culture, you might be familiar with things like Gamergate, which was a thing in the game culture where young male gamers were essentially harassing this journalist who they thought had done something wrong by giving a positive review or something like that. I can't remember the exact details. And they framed it as being about ethics in game journalism, but it really seemed like this horrible misogynist thing, which just kind of ties in with incel culture, and it kind of gave gamers in a way a bad name, but not necessarily unwarrantedly, because if you've got a lot of young males in a culture, you're going to get something of a toxic mix in there from some of them. And that feels like it relates to things like 4chan and 8chan, these online discussion boards. You get these young males together and this young male culture. But how does that all come around to anti-Semitism and belief in these conspiracy theories? Like there's this conspiracy theory.
So I think being around men who didn't necessarily like Western women very much, instead of being aggressive or reactionary with them, I learned to just kind of talk on their level, but make it clear that I didn't necessarily agree with them, that when they said something unacceptable, it was unacceptable. And obviously to get to a point where I'd be like, okay, these people don't hold the same views as me, but they're good people and they accept who I am and they accept our differences. But there are people who just don't, and they're just sexist or racist or something.
Right.
So when I met him and he was telling me these views, I was like, well, he respects me and he respects women in his life, so that's not an issue. And he's not demonstrating to me any kind of severe hate for anyone, so we must be able to get to an understanding here.
Right.
Rather than being reactionary, I was like just kind of digging. But then it got to a point where I got really scared of digging because I really didn't know. I didn't want to hear what he might say, and I just stopped. And that, I think, I'm a little bit shocked by that reaction, because that's not how I operate usually. Um,
So did you felt like you were scraping away the surface to a degree, and were you starting to see things that you didn't want to learn more about? So you felt
yeah.
like there was something there, or was it a conscious decision, or do you think you just kind of shied away from it?
Interesting. I think, I'd call friends or family, or they'd call me and they'd be like, "Oh, how's it going with the guy you've been really excited about?" And I'd be like, "Oh, great. Yeah, we did this. We had all this fun. Da da da. Oh, yeah, but he hates Jews. Da 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 da." And I just kind of go, "Ha ha. No, that
Hmm.
can't be. It can't be real because when I say it, it's not real. Who does that? Who?" I've met
Yeah,
race. I've met people who hate black people. I've met people who, from the UK. I've met lots of people who hate Muslims. I've been around racists, and I think largely think they're deplorable or clueless. But it's so it for me, anti-Semitism is so out there that it just it doesn't make any sense. Does that
yeah.
make
It's
sense?
no,
Like
it does. I
nothing.
mean, it's like he's joking. It's it's almost like you can't take it seriously because it's so extreme, and he seems like otherwise like such a nice guy. Like, I have some
Mm,
friends from Britain who would make jokes that are very kind of I don't know, risky in sense that they flirt around the edges of racism, and you know that it's just them making a very very bad taste joke, and they're not racist. But then what if they are? It's
mm,
it's it's like I think people use humor in a way to feel other people out. If
yeah.
you frame it as a joke, and you say, "Oh, it's all the Jews who are behind this," or whatever, and you make a joke about it, and then
That's
you can kind of
obviously
gauge someone's
ridiculous.
reaction,
Yeah.
and then you get plausible deniability.
And he loved American culture, and he, in it, when he was a teenager, like a lot of Spanish youths, was a communist. So I
Hmm.
just presumed he had kind of similar ideological values to me, but didn't necessarily want to express them. Um, so much. And what I really liked about him was that he would come up with these like just ridiculous ideas that he'd kind of just been thinking about for a while. What I really liked about him, and even at the end when he explained everything to me and it was shocking, it was like he'd really gotten to the bottom of what conspiracy theories were. He wasn't flirting with the edges. He wasn't like, some Biden paedophile over here, and I don't like the state of Israel. He, or what was it? Something about returning to the gold standard. That one was strange.
Yeah.
But when he really got down to it, he knew it was all about anti-Semitism. And he was like,
Hmm.
and so he had really analyzed conspiracy theories to their end point. And he didn't need me to try and dig for him. He got it, and he completely accepted this as his worldview.
So yeah, when you talk about conspiracy theories, a lot of people talk about somewhat extreme things like I don't know if you heard about chemtrails and things like that, or the idea that 9/11 was an inside job, or even things like people are being secretly microchipped and things like that, extreme things. And what you're talking about here seems to be more about the idea that there's some vast plot to change the world by changing culture. Now, did he talk about these more extreme conspiracy theories as well, like things like I don't know, like 9/11 being an inside job?
No. So it started with coronavirus. And then
Hmm.
I've been reading a really nice, easy philosophy book. He was like, "Oh, we're talking about philosophy. Okay, let's go in." And it was just conspiracy theory after conspiracy theory after conspiracy theory. But none of it was about kind of the usual 9/11, moon landings, fluoride in water, any of the ones that I was familiar with. It was anti-EU, it was fear of Joe Biden becoming president. He cried when Trump lost
Wow.
the yeah.
So is the idea there that I think you mentioned that he felt that there's or you wrote a kind of mass cultural push by the US to destroy the culture of European states. Like, why is the US trying to destroy European states?
Because I don't know. I don't to something about a Jewish cabal, something about it. Nothing made sense. Something about a Jewish cabal, something about taking over Spain, something about breaking up the EU. That's
So
all I'm looking.
I would have thought if anybody would be breaking up the EU, it would be Russia.
I mean, but I mean, it depends. You can think about it. I mean, you can think about it in a way that if you don't want a liberalizing power bloc, I mean, the EU is the
Right.
only power bloc left where they are promoting human rights, and they have some form of capitalism that tries to spread equality. And maybe some people in America want to break that up because I don't know. I mean, but yeah, absolutely. If you're thinking about if anybody wants to break up the EU as a power bloc, it would probably be Russia, Russian government, or even Chinese government. So there's not
But,
a
yeah,
the
yeah, definitely.
of how they govern undemocratically.
And why would Biden be more of a threat than Trump in that regard?
Now, this I never, because I was just too frightened to get into it because it didn't make any sense to me. It was really Q inspired that
Right.
Biden was a
Hmm.
paedophile and Biden was working. It was something about Biden working with the paedophile rings of Jewish people.
Okay.
Everything for him came back to the Jews, from what I can gather. Yeah.
Now, the paedophile rings of Jewish people was this paedophile aspect something that he felt was permeating everything, or was it just like in America or something like that?
It seemed to be really American centered. It didn't seem like it was affecting Spain. The only way it was affecting Spain was it was going to take over Spain. And
Right.
actually, when all this information came out, and he was saying some. Also, Joe Biden wanted currency tied to the dollar. He wanted to get rid of that and go back to the gold standard. And
Joe
I
Biden.
have, huh?
It doesn't make any sense.
Any sense? So I was like, okay, right, I've got some kind of very basic understanding of the gold standard, and that's what we had in the pre 1930s. It was the financial crisis was the gold standard was blamed for that, so then they changed because it caused such big fluctuations. That's what I was told. Not what I was told. That's what I learned many years ago. So I don't understand what his ideas were. And he was like, you have to buy gold. It's the most important thing.
Yeah, and that's a common thing. It's kind of like a libertarian thing in the States,
Yeah.
like financial independence.
Yeah.
People like the idea of gold standard versus fiat money, which is the idea of money just being created out of thin air, which is essentially what we have now. I think the problem with the gold standard was that there's only so much gold, and so there's issues with money supply. You can't get enough money for the economy to work. But of course, everybody views coming off the gold standard as being this huge money grabbing thing by, I guess, the Jews, because that's what the whole conspiracy theory is that the Jews run the banking system and they took us off the gold standard. And there's this huge long term conspiracy that's been going on for decades. But it's interesting with your friends' ideas of Biden being more harmful and things like that. It seems very much like he's been influenced very much by his readings on things like 8chan rather than I guess local conspiracy theories. Is there like a local conspiracy theory culture? Is there other Spanish language discussion boards for that type of thing?
Well, I don't know much about this, but I do know that well, not that I know, I believe that a big part of his friendship group is based on the sharing of these conspiracy theories. And he showed me a website in Spanish talking about this stuff that his friend had sent him. And I remember being like, "What source is that?" And he was like, "Just a guy's blog in Spanish." And I went, "Well, then how do you know it's true?"
Hmm.
Because it's just a guy. And he was like, "Well, why?" And his argument was, "Why would it be less true than a peer-reviewed journal or a newspaper?" But again, I let it go. But so I
Yeah.
do believe there are Spanish language conspiracy theories going around. But
And it,
he but his experience was largely in English. But
Right.
one of his friends speaks Spanish, so I presume there must be some Spanish language stuff going around.
So when you talk about his group of friends, are these like his old like school friends or people he grew up with, or is this like a new group of people that he's
People he grew up with all played games together, from what I can tell, and played
uh,
sports together and smoked weed together.
and they're all similar in this kind of belief of this vast Jewish conspiracy?
I believe so.
Fascinating.
I mean, there's lots of things I didn't ask about out of worry that
Yeah.
what the answer would be.
So how did things come to a head for you? And you obviously you've broken it off now. How did that come about?
Um, he he said something. I he After we had the conversation where he told me about the gold standard, and he told me about taking over Spain and America breaking up the EU. But again, it was never the Jews. He never specifically said the Jews. And I said to him on the phone, I said, "Do you know this is a conspiracy theory? These are conspiracy theories." And he said, "Yes, I do. But I know it's true because I feel it. I just know it's going to happen." And I was like, right, that's exactly what conspiracy theorists say. Okay. So that shocked me, and I pulled back. And that's when I became relatively heavily invested in how to talk to someone to try and convince them otherwise. And how can I come from a place of understanding, like I did in Vietnam? How can I come from a place of understanding where I can maybe shift their ideas a little bit and make them think in a different way? Not make them, make them question certain beliefs. When I was in Vietnam, I would just kind of talk about things in a calm, logical way and give people facts and ideas and philosophical ideas about, human rights and respecting each other. And they'd come back at me and be like, "Oh, that's a really interesting point. Da, da, da." You
Mhm.
know, trying to find ways to change his mind in some way. It felt fruitless because
Hmm.
I couldn't come at him with facts.
It's because he was resistant to them, or
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I don't think he realized the seriousness of his ideas, even though he didn't want to tell me outright all these theories and his belief system. He didn't think they were that bad. He didn't think they were that serious. So it came to a head. That was a big reason. So I really stepped back, and I was making myself unhappy, trying to think of ways I could navigate this situation, but still be around him because I really liked him. Because, be clear, like on on a personal level, he was great. But he had a really stressful day, and I don't think he regulated emotions. And what really brought it to a head for me was he said something aggressive about one of his family members, and he was venting to me, but it was really frightening to hear. So that's when I was like, whoa, okay, I really, really need to think about what I'm doing. And that made me kind of go, okay, I've been really stressed, and I've been stressing myself out over some guy I haven't been dating for very long, and this shouldn't be happening. So that's when I stepped back, and I really was like, right, I need to address what all these things that are really worrying me about him. And that's when I took some time out, and then I addressed, and I actually just said to him, "What do you think of Jews?" And that's when it just all came out.
wow. So did he kind of explain to you the full conspiracy theory at that point, like or his full belief
Um,
system?
he explained to me the basis of his conspiracy. It started from a hatred of Israel. So it started from a contested territory, and there are lots of people who disagree with the state of Israel, and that's what I said. I was like, yeah, absolutely. Like a lot of people in the UK is particularly anti-Israel, but for him that wasn't enough. It was a state created by Zionists. Zionists were evil, and they had colluded with national governments to fake the Holocaust, to falsify sources, to work with universities in America and pay universities to create false primary sources.
Wow.
Historians were in on it. Everyone was in on it. And I think, I mean, when it got to a point where he was denying the Holocaust and denying the number of Jews being killed and denying the existence of gas chambers, that is something I've never had to encounter and hope I never have to encounter again. It was really, really shocking.
Yeah, it must have been very disappointing when that all came out.
Yeah, I think we can say it was disappointing.
Yes, that's an understatement there.
It's just like, oh wow, what do I do with this? And I was so in shock, I just couldn't even say anything. And I just was like, I just remember him talking and talking and talking, and I just went, that's a lot for me to take in. And I was like, I just want you to know. I think I just went something like, I just want you to know that I really believe in the historical method.
Right.
I'm not sure, and I was just like, yeah, I mean, I was a history undergraduate.
Right, yeah.
So, I'm not like in any way an expert, but I do historiography, I do think it has its plus points. I do think that I do a good job.
What do you think he thinks of you? Does he think that you are being brainwashed? And does he try to help you see the light?
No. He from the moment he met me, he said he really liked me because he thought I was intelligent. That's always a nice compliment. And he always framed conversations in a way where it was, we are different, but we're learning from each other. And he knew that I was really passionate about education, about further education. If I could, I would do a PhD, so he knew that about me from the beginning. So he already knew that I really believed in learning. I really believed in the logical structures we use to make arguments in education and Enlightenment thinking, and the idea, and philosophical structuring of ideas, and the importance of evidence in history. I'm not making much sense. He knew that this was important to me. So and what I found interesting was that he described himself as a skeptic.
Yes, I've heard that. Yes, like a Holocaust skeptic.
So this was new to me, but the skepticism was about researching alone on specific websites. Mm-hmm. And reading other people who had spoken about this. The questioning of how many Jews were killed in the Holocaust, the questioning of that figure wasn't from analyzing any source materials. It was just somebody on the internet had said that. Right. Other people had said that.
Yeah, it's the whole do your own research thing, which people say, and it sounds good. And if you could do your own research, that would be great. But they're not doing their own research. They're reading somebody else's research. So I guess that was the end of it. After that, and did you talk to him again after that?
No. Yeah. The first thing I did, I was in shock. The first thing I did because we were on the phone. So the first thing I did was put down the phone and call my brother and say, right. Brother, hi. Because he knew some of the issues, and I was worried about the conspiracy theories, and I didn't know what to do with it. And he was always really supportive. He was like, look, he's got some crazy ideas and they're pretty negative, but if you're happy with him and he is kind to you and he is as and he is attentive and sweet and fun to be around, then I can't, if he's not harming anyone, then I can't say that you shouldn't see him, which I thought was a nice, refreshing take, and probably not something that I would say to a loved one or friend. Probably be more judgmental. But after that, I because I still, even after that conversation, after he told me that, I was like, okay, so we're going to see each other on Sunday. I still wanted to spend time with him and see him, but I also knew that I couldn't. So the first thing I did was call my brother and say, he's a Holocaust denier. And he just like erupted and was like, okay, well.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the line.
Yeah. And there's as soon as I told him, I can't see you anymore, these are the reasons why. And I framed it around racism, and I framed it around, it's really stupid, learning how to like read primary sources and look at the evidence yourself and then form a conclusion, and how important that is, and not to cherry pick evidence that somebody else has told you, or go on a belief system because you believe it to be right. That's not how people do history, you hope. Yeah, as soon as I messaged him that, I blocked him on everything and felt considerably better.
Right. Yeah. It's
like this weight.
Yeah, people get that reaction a lot, I think, like when they do finally, get rid of an issue like that there is a big weight lifted off. I think, it's very interesting for me, this discussion, because I often talk to people who used to be conspiracy theorists. And so I come to it from perhaps an optimistic perspective, in that these people got out of conspiracism. And I wrote a book about how to help people in that. And some of the advice I give in helping people is kind of the things that you were doing. You were, talking to people intelligently about things and encouraging them to look at other sources. And, the discussions you had in Vietnam sounded like, to some degree, productive, that people would actually, at least listen to you. But I think with you and with Sarah last week, who I talked to, there are some people who are so deep in that it's very, very challenging. And I think perhaps part of the challenge with this guy was that he kind of had another support structure with his friends, which made it very resilient, made his belief structure very resilient, because there's him and his friends who have been together for many, many years, and then there's you. And I think it's very, very difficult to kind of go up against that. And did you feel like you made any progress at all with him?
No. I hope I did in some way. I don't think he's so deep. I think that's what was shocking for me. I don't think he was so deep that it coloured everything in his life. My presumption of conspiracy theorist was that it takes over your life and that's all you talk about and think about. Right. It's the typical, you sit on the computer 12 hours a day watching videos. These are the stories that I've heard, that's why I was even surprised that you'd want to talk to me, because I don't think my situation is anywhere near as bad as a lot of other people who have to live with this with their family members or people they love. But he got on with his daily life. He was respectful. He worked, he had friends, he was building a really nice life. Even though he cried when Biden came in, the next breath he was like, yeah, but it doesn't matter because I'm Spanish. I'm Spanish. I don't live there. Like, it's not. I was like, it's not really going to affect you though, is it? And he was like, yeah, not really. It doesn't matter. So he had this healthy ability to put it to one side, but it was the fundamental basics of his reality.
Yeah.
And I don't think I could do anything. Maybe if it was a new obsession, but it took over your life, you can undo it. But it felt like the very foundation of how he understood the world around him.
Yeah,
and that's really sad.
I would think you probably did help to a degree, because you just the encouragement that you gave him for looking at primary sources, even though it kind of like sounds a little bit weak. It's actually, it's very, very good advice. And because you have like a background in history, I think he would, people who are conspiracy theorists reject things immediately, but they still hear what you're saying. And over time, it can actually have an effect. But your relationship with him was relatively short, just a few months, and so you probably were kind of doomed from the start to not be able to make a significant dent in that. I mean, perhaps if you'd gone on to have a long-term relationship with him, then things might have been different. But obviously, that wasn't going to happen. But I would think that you probably did plant a few seeds in there, and you probably will. I don't know if you'll ever follow up with him in the years in the future, but it would be interesting to see how he actually processes that information. We'll probably never know.
I mean, this only happened on Sunday, so this is all very fresh. So I can't. So at the moment it's quite a big deal, and also I think a bit of a ridiculous experience. It feels like a ridiculous experience, but I think that's why I wanted to talk about it, because it was draining, and it was a bit scary at times, and it also something you never think will happen to you, and it's something on the fringes. But I don't know if this is just fear speaking, but I do think it's becoming more prevalent. And when I started, I was talking about how conspiracy theories are everywhere. Everyone I speak to here is a adherent to a coronavirus conspiracy theory.
Yeah, well, it's quite prevalent here. Like I think significant numbers of people in the US say they won't take the vaccine, and I live in a reasonably not too conservative a neighborhood, but you still see people outside refusing to wear masks inside stores and things like that. And certainly up the hill, further up the hill where it's a bit more rural, there's a lot of that going on. But it's interesting to hear that it's happening in other countries. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation, and I know you you think it exists on the spectrum of conspiracy theories. In a way, it's not an extreme conspiracy theory like chemtrails and whatnot, or moon landing hoaxes and things. But it's obviously something that has a huge impact on his life, and has a huge impact on the people around him in terms of it being like underpinning his beliefs about how the world works. So even though it's perhaps not as extreme as some conspiracy theories, it's still very, very significant. And it's a problem that people have to deal with. Like, how do you talk to people like that? And I think you did essentially do the right thing from what I heard. And it's just that.
Thank you for validating my decision.
No, there's
guilt because there's this person. Also, I think I had to remind myself that I'm in a new place. So I'm also in a vulnerable position. So I need, if I meet somebody I really like, I'm really going to latch on to them. So that's something I had to really keep in mind. Would I be doing this if I were somewhere else and I was more settled? What was I? But thank you for validating me, because there is a guilt. I didn't want to stop seeing him.
It's not like you have the responsibility to cure him. He's his own guy, and you are you, and like I said, I think you probably did help to the degree you could in the time available, and the fact that it was so deep seated in him, you were never going to just simply explain things to him. This was a kind of a misconception I had when I started talking to people about conspiracy theories, is that obviously these things are wrong, so all you have to do is explain why they're wrong, and then they will be like, oh right, and they'll move on. But it doesn't work like that, obviously, and I'm sure you've seen your attempts kind of bouncing off him, and they become immune to reason, immune to facts, on a short-term basis, but it does actually help, I think, on the long term.
That's good to know. Thank you.
All right. Well, was there anything else you wanted to mention that we didn't discuss?
I do. I did come here because of the of a general fear of how populist way of thinking is. So I think my thoughts were just what can be done to counteract this. And I listened to the video. I think it was previous to this, and a woman was talking about kind of taking dangerous content offline and this solving the problem.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's this kind of a complicated subject because there's pros and cons of taking things offline. Because if you take it off YouTube, say, then it goes somewhere else. I've actually had problems with YouTube. Like I had a podcast interview with a guy about QAnon where we're discussing QAnon and in a critical way. And Facebook deleted the video because they said it was cyber stalking and harassment, which it obviously wasn't. But they're actually being quite heavy-handed now. And I think for a lot of people, that provides evidence that there's some kind of great conspiracy trying to suppress their ideas. But on the other hand, it stops a lot of people being exposed to those ideas. So it slows the spread. So I'm not sure what the answer is there and to what degree simply blocking things is the best approach. I think we have to supply something else if we're going to remove it. We have to supply information that's true if we're going to be blocking all this other information. Otherwise, people will still be attracted to it, even if it's over on some obscure website.
But if there's such a mistrust of people in institutions of any kind, I mean, it goes to a distrust of governments, a distrust of corporations, a distrust of anything large and powerful. Then what can be said to counteract it? Because all evidence will be deemed falsifiable.
Something that might be helpful there is teaching people about how these institutions and governments and things work. So a lot of people, they view them essentially as being these black boxes where they have no idea what goes on inside them, and educating people about how government works and how the people work within government and how the individuals do their jobs within government and within science. This is certainly an approach that I encourage with scientists, is that, engaging more with people about their work.
Yeah, and I think it comes from education at a young age. I genuinely believe, it's something we don't have in the UK. We have an education in scientific method from a young age, but we don't have any education in how to critically engage with philosophical thought, how to debate different ideas and to bring evidence about those different, into your arguments, the kind of structure of logical arguments. And I don't think we learn that, and especially we don't learn anything about the philosophical method.
Yeah, I think things like that do happen, but I think it's kind of it varies a lot by individual teachers and what initiative they take. I'm friends with a few teachers here in the United States. I have friends and relatives who are teachers here, and I brought these issues up with them, like, what more can we do? Like, teach critical thinking and things like that. And they will tell me that they do teach critical thinking, and they do have classes in subjects like this and things like how to read a news story and how to check the sources. So it's certainly happening, but I think it's perhaps something that needs to be more addressed as a fundamental part of learning, in the same way that we've treated science and mathematics and basic English as being fundamentals. And it would be great if we could move more towards that, because it is increasingly important. But I think that you're even going to get some pushback on that. There there was a famous thing that happened in the United States, well, slightly famous, where the Republican Party, they put out what they call a plank, which is a list of all the policies that they're going to promote if they get elected. And one of them was they will, I can't remember how they phrased it exactly, but it was basically they would stop critical thinking being taught in schools. And they actually used the phrase critical thinking because critical thinking kind of became for them the idea that left-wing people are going to teach people about, whatever, religion and morals and gender diversity and racism and historical privilege and things like that under the guise of critical thinking. Mm. So we got this pushback against the very, very idea of critical thinking itself, because they didn't realize that it actually meant something more abstract than that. So it's I think any push to encourage teaching things like this comparative analysis or whatever of sources is going to actually get some political pushback, because not everybody wants there to be this free and open discussion of things. But I do think it is definitely something that we should push for, even though we are going to get some pushback on it.
Yeah, this is something that the Vietnamese government has noticed. Their schooling system doesn't engage with doesn't teach in any way any critical thinking. So they've started they've started initiatives for critical thinking classes in some schools, which is fascinating.
Yeah, it's definitely something that's needed. It's also something that I think is often poorly defined, what critical thinking actually is. Yeah. So it's a bit difficult to argue for. I think we need a better definition of exactly what we are trying to promote. Because people think critical thinking is just like using your brain to think about things really hard. That's kind of what the definitions boil down to. And there's probably better ways of putting it. But anyway, it's definitely something I'm in favor of. And
I do think it's really important to accept people's fears, legitimate fears about government. And people and groups of people who hold positions of power.
Yeah.
And there have been huge conspiracies unveiled over the past 50 years, even longer, where it's like, wow, I can't believe my government did that.
Absolutely.
But how to place that in a sphere where you still trust because you have to put in trust of the machinery of government, and you have to trust that process. Otherwise, what else have you got?
Yeah, but it's a kind of a trust yet verify, I think. Yeah. Or if you want distrust yet verify, you can still have a suspicion of the government, but you can still check what they're doing. And obviously, the government isn't lying about everything, even if there are people within the government who are, to some degree, acting nefariously. The machine that we have here, the system of government and academia and science, is generally an honest one, because it's comprised of people, and people are generally honest. And I think if we can shine a light on that and get people to, as you say, trust it to the extent that it's justified, then that would be a good thing.
Mm.
All right. Well, thank you very much. This has been a great discussion. I'll let you go. Bye.
Thank you very much.